Resident Evil is coming back to theaters once again, and this time we have Zach Cregger behind the camera. Cregger, who directed Barbarian, is directing and co-writing the new Resident Evil movie, which is set during the chaotic viral outbreak in Raccoon City. And after hearing talk about the movie, there are definitely some things that have caught my attention. But despite some of the ideas Cregger is bringing to the table, I have to be honest. I think Resident Evil movies need to stop being made. And before anyone assumes I'm saying that because I hate Resident Evil, that's not true at all. In fact, my relationship with the Resident Evil movies is actually pretty complicated. When it comes to the Milla Jovovich movies, I absolutely hated the first Resident Evil when I originally watched it. However, over the years, I actually warmed up to it. It's not a perfect movie, but I appreciate it more now than I did when I first saw it. And then there's Resident Evil Apocalypse. I love that movie. I also love Resident Evil Extinction and Resident Evil Afterlife. Those are movies that I can go back to and enjoy despite all of the problems they have. Resident Evil Retribution, on the other hand, was pretty underwhelming to me, and unfortunately I felt similarly about Resident Evil The Final Chapter. After following that series for so long, I just didn't think the ending delivered the way it should have. And despite all of that, I actually own the entire Milla Jovovich Resident Evil movie series in a Blu-ray collection. So clearly, I'm not against the movies simply because they're different from the games. But then you have the George Romero version. I actually stopped watching that when they were referring to a Hispanic woman as Jill Valentine. And that was one of those moments where I just thought, what are we doing here? Jill Valentine is an established character. If you're going to make a Resident Evil movie and use the name Jill Valentine, then make Jill Valentine. Don't take an entirely different character and slap the name of a beloved video game character onto her. And that's part of the larger problem I've had with these adaptations. Hollywood keeps wanting to make Resident Evil movies, but it seems like there's always some reason why they just can't make a Resident Evil movie. Now we have Zach Cregger's version. And I'll give Cregger credit where credit is due. He seems genuinely passionate about the games. Cregger has said that he wanted to make the Resident Evil movie that he always wanted to see. He wants the movie to feel more like the experience of actually playing the games. He's talked about incorporating puzzles and items from the games. He's also talked about using a third-person camera perspective inspired by the modern Resident Evil games along with first-person perspectives. The movie follows Bryan, played by Austin Abrams, a medical courier who becomes trapped in a Raccoon City outbreak. And Cregger specifically wanted Bryan to be inexperienced. He's not Leon Kennedy. He's not Chris Redfield. He's not some highly trained government agent or elite soldier. Cregger describes Bryan as being more like Ethan Winters than Leon. Bryan doesn't know how to deal with the monsters he's encountering. He's not an expert with firearms. His instinct is basically to panic and run away. And honestly, I don't hate that idea. In fact, I think having an inexperienced protagonist could work incredibly well in a Resident Evil movie. But here's the thing. If Zach Cregger wanted an inexperienced character as the lead, why didn't he just use Ethan Winters? That's the part that really gets me. You already have the perfect character for what Cregger says he wants to do. Ethan Winters starts Resident Evil 7 as an ordinary guy who has absolutely no business dealing with the nightmare he finds himself trapped in. He's not Leon, he's not Chris, he's not Jill, he's just Ethan. And then Resident Evil 7 puts him through absolute hell. So if Cregger wanted to make a Resident Evil movie about an inexperienced person being thrown into a horrifying situation, he could have taken elements from Resident Evil 7 and built the movie around Ethan trying to save Milla. You could have Ethan arriving at the Baker property. You could have the creepy house. You could have him searching rooms for items. You could have puzzles. You could have limited resources. You could have him constantly wondering what the hell is happening. And you could still give audiences the inexperienced protagonist Cregger apparently wants. That's literally what Resident Evil 7 already did, and that's what makes this new movie so confusing to me. Cregger wants the movie to feel like the games. He wants puzzles. He wants items. He wants game-inspired camera work. He wants the audience to feel like they're inside a survival horror game. He wants an inexperienced protagonist. Resident Evil 7 already gave you the blueprint. You didn't have to invent Bryan. You could have used Ethan. And if you didn't want to adapt Resident Evil 7 directly, you could have taken the basic concept and created a story around Ethan that still gave you plenty of creative freedom. Instead, we're getting another original character in another Resident Evil adaptation. And once again, none of the lead characters are actually characters from the games. That's my biggest issue. I understand wanting to tell a new story. I understand that Resident Evil doesn't necessarily have to retell the exact same stories from the games. But when you have a franchise with characters like Jill Valentine, Chris Redfield, Leon Kennedy, Claire Redfield, and Ethan Winters, why do we constantly have to create somebody new? Especially when the filmmaker is specifically talking about how much the games influenced him. If you love these games that much, why not actually use the characters? And that's why I think this movie could have been something really interesting. Imagine taking the Raccoon City outbreak and putting Ethan Winters in the middle of it. Or give us Jill Valentine trying to survive the outbreak. Or follow Leon during his first terrifying night in Raccoon City. Or give us Claire searching for Chris. There are so many possibilities. Instead, we have Bryan, a medical courier who gets caught up in everything after accidentally hitting a woman with his car. Apparently, Bryan's biggest mistake isn't being stupid enough to walk directly toward danger. His mistake is trying to help somebody. And again, I actually like the idea of an ordinary person trying to do the right thing in the middle of a nightmare. That could make for a good horror movie. But again, why does it have to be Resident Evil? That's the question I keep coming back to. If you remove the Resident Evil name, you still have an ordinary person caught in a viral outbreak, encountering monsters, searching for items, solving puzzles, and trying to escape. So what makes this specifically a Resident Evil movie beyond the branding, setting, and references? Cregger seems to understand that Resident Evil isn't just about shooting zombies. The games are about exploration. They're about tension. They're about resource management. They're about finding a key and realizing you have no idea where it goes. They're about opening a door and wondering what's waiting on the other side. They're about hearing something in another room and not knowing whether you actually want to find out what it is. Those are the things that make Resident Evil work, and I absolutely want to see more of that in a movie. The idea of using the third-person camera language from the games is also interesting. Cregger has explained that he wants to establish that style from the beginning instead of suddenly introducing it when the horror starts. The opening reportedly uses the third-person perspective even while Bryan is simply walking through a hospital lobby. That's actually a pretty clever idea. Rather than treating the camera technique like a gimmick, he's trying to establish it as the visual language of the entire movie. And that's something I can appreciate. Cregger also said that he originally wrote the script expecting somebody else to direct it. He didn't think the studio would actually let him direct the movie himself. But once he got the opportunity, he decided not to substantially change the screenplay because he still believed in what he had written. And I respect that. It sounds like he genuinely cares about this project. That's why I'm not sitting here saying that the movie is automatically going to be terrible. Maybe Zach Cregger will surprise me. Maybe this will actually be the best live-action Resident Evil movie we've ever gotten. Maybe Bryan will turn out to be a great character. Maybe the puzzles and items will actually feel natural. Maybe the third-person camera work will make the movie feel like you're playing a Resident Evil game. Maybe the Raccoon City setting will finally give us the survival horror experience that fans have been waiting for. I hope so. But I'm still exhausted by the constant cycle of Resident Evil movies. We've had the Milla Jovovich movies. We've had Welcome to Raccoon City. We've had other attempts at adapting or reimagining the franchise, and now we're doing it again. At some point, I just want Hollywood to leave Resident Evil alone, because the games are already doing a fantastic job of being Resident Evil. And that's ultimately why my position isn't necessarily Resident Evil can never work as a movie. It's that after all these attempts, I'm not convinced we need another one. Especially when filmmakers keep finding ways to tell stories that don't actually use the characters fans already know and love. If Zach Cregger wanted an inexperienced protagonist, Ethan Winters was right there. If he wanted puzzles and items, the games are filled with them. If he wanted survival horror, Resident Evil 7 already demonstrated how effective that formula can be. If he wanted an iconic location, Resident Evil has Raccoon City, the Spencer Mansion, the Baker Estate, and countless others. The ingredients are already there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, and maybe that's what bothers me most about this new movie. Cregger seems to understand the games. He seems to understand what makes them fun. He seems to understand what makes them scary. But instead of using the characters we've already become attached to, we're getting another original character. So maybe this movie will prove me completely wrong. Maybe I'll walk out of the theater saying, okay, That is the Resident Evil movie we've been waiting for. And if that happens, I'll happily admit I was wrong. But until then, I'm sticking with my opinion. Resident Evil movies need to stop being made. Give me the games, give me the survival horror, give me the puzzles, give me the characters. And maybe, just maybe, we don't need another Hollywood attempt to turn Resident Evil into something it doesn't need to be. But what do you think? Are you interested in Zach Cregger's Resident Evil movie? Do you like the idea of following Bryan as an inexperienced person caught in the Raccoon City outbreak? Or do you agree with me that if Cregger wanted an inexperienced protagonist, he should have simply used Ethan Winters and adapted elements from Resident Evil 7? And would you rather see a Resident Evil movie actually focus on characters like Jill, Chris, Leon, Claire, or Ethan? Let me know what you think in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and check out my Patreon in the video description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Until then, game on.